Noel, I think you were going to take the lead moderating the UN question. I do think we need to move in that direction.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I think you got the question. I'm not going to waste much time introducing it.
Okay.
If we're looking at what were the flaws in the past and what can we do about the future, how can we help the special envoy to find a way forward? That's the key question, taking into account what happened in the past. I think that Helen wants to speak first, didn't you, on this?
Well, basically on the issue of the three references, as far as I'm concerned, the only one that's a major fundamental problem to future discussions is 2216. Because if we look at the other two, I mean, the NDC outcomes, there's only about 1,800 plus of them. Yes. So within that context, it's always possible with people who wish to find solutions, and to extract from these the ones that can be agreed upon and can therefore be negotiated. So in my view, the NDC outcomes are not a constraint to finding a discussion or a solution, or indeed, regardless indeed of who is negotiating, which I think is another topic on which I'm not talking. Similarly, to some extent, I think you can say the same thing about the GCC agreement, in the sense that, yes, of course, it's very much outdated. And because of that, it can't be treated as the Quran or the Bible, certainly not in a Salafi manner. So I think, those two are not really fundamental problems. I think the fundamental problems for UN intervention is 2216. I've said this on multiple occasions and various, fora, in writing, in speaking, and everything else. Basically, again, 2216 has two fundamental problems. The first one is that it defines that Hadi is the legitimate president, which is the reason he is hanging on, and he is hanging on to that because basically he's really got nothing else to hang on to justify his presence. Whether the time was extended by 1 year or indefinitely in 2014, I never saw a document to prove it or anything of the kind, or even for the duration. But basically, 2216 says he is the legitimate president. Therefore, that is his legal, if one can say that, basis for his position. And the second part of 2216, which is also equally totally outdated and inappropriate, is what is effectively a demand for Houthi surrender. I was reading it again this afternoon, looking at the chapter in the book, suggesting that they should withdraw to where they were in 2014 or 2013 and withdraw to everything. And then I noticed there was another statement by Hadi demanding that they should actually even withdraw out of Saada. So I'm not quite sure where they were supposed to be going. It's just, I think I have to use the word ridiculous when we're talking in 2021. Since when the Houthis, now control 2/3 or more of the population, maybe less of the geography of the country, but then a lot of what they don't control is basically desert, part of the Rub'a al-Khali. So, the 2216 is completely out of date and completely inappropriate. Now, UN resolutions don't get replaced, they get updated and sort of superseded by new ones. And it seems to me that that's really the most important thing that can be done at the moment to help the special envoy, because as long as his activities are constrained by 2216, he's effectively not in a position to do anything, because he has to take his instructions from Hadi, and Hadi is not going to say, oh, please go ahead. So, this to me is the number one step, and at the UN is to have a resolution that deals with the reality on the ground. That's the same thing. And I think, since we're probably not going to end up dealing with question 3, I might just say, what little I have to say on what can be done to help the situation today. And in my view on that one, again, I think overall my position is that global powers' influence in Yemen is extremely limited. Ultimately, even should there be a wonderful signed, sealed agreement between Iran and Saudi Arabia tomorrow, setting peace and solving the Yemeni situation, it will not do that. I thought it was very interesting to hear, the evolution and the positions that were presented about MBS. But, even if he's willing to, even if he did sign an agreement tomorrow with Raisi, we are still, the Houthis are not Iranian proxies. Therefore, it could have some impact. It could have some impact on, for example, the Houthi missile and drone strikes into Saudi Arabia, but it would not make any significant difference, for example, on the major current military front, which is Maghreb. So I think the main things that can be done by external agents are to help, but they cannot solve. And this ultimately, the solution remains with the Yemenis. And as long as Yemenis parties, and that means both the Houthis and the government and a number of other parties, are not willing to compromise and to look for a solution, the war will continue. And as we all know, there are a number of people, and what we call them warlords or war profiteers, who are doing extremely well out of this war. And unfortunately, they have quite a lot more power. What the outside world can do, I've listed 3 small things that they can do, which are important. I think the first one would be to help the emergence of a more unified anti-Houthi negotiating team. I mean, at the moment, if we have the Houthis on one side, at least they represent them. They represent something. Who are they going to talk to? I mean, are we going to end up with a other side, including on the one hand the IRG and the STC and Tariq's forces, none between whom who between them don't represent very much. The endless talk of including women. Yes, there should be women in every delegation. There should be 30% women in every delegation, but we shouldn't have a delegation of women. Women are part of all the other factions that exist. And the building of, of basically forcing the anti-Houthi forces, or not forcing, but trying to influence the anti-Houthi forces into creating a representative delegation, is really the big major issue that should be addressed. And that is where I think, Grundberg can hopefully achieve something. He has, he starts, I think, with better hopes than anyone else. And, any other external forces can also contribute and help in that. And of course, the third point, I think, we've discussed the whole issue of counterterrorism. We've discussed the whole issue of what's happening, of the interests of the external powers. And I think this has been said, I think, both by Mustafa and by Ambassador Bodin. Fundamentally, it is time that external agents focused on the interests and concerns of the Yemeni people. We're talking about poverty alleviation. We're talking about development, we're talking about social services, we're talking about some kind of maybe more representative political entity, and not be focused on geopolitics and, the Bab el-Mandab and counterterrorism and any other issues. So I think this is my response to
the 2 questions.
To the 2 questions, which may be appropriate. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Who else would like to speak? Laurent, do you want to say, comment on this?
Well, it's going to be rather quick because I guess my piece of the cake is probably the thinnest and probably the least relevant when it comes to Yemen. I had a chapter on the EU, and I considered it was interesting because it was sort of an example of the kind of fragmentation that you can see. And when we're talking about the EU, it's actually talking about 27 separate foreign policies. Some are completely irrelevant. If you're thinking of Malta, I don't think they have anything to say about Yemen, which is specific. Well, when the UK was in, it was much more than that. France, it's a little less than the UK. Germany, even less. But it's also looking at what the EU institutions are actually doing. So it's these 27 now foreign policies plus what the institutions are doing, the EU institutions, and these generally have a kind of autonomous culture which generates a different form of foreign policy. So the EU foreign policy is not the 27 added together. It's something else, which is in itself interesting. But what's kind of the desperate, what makes us desperate when we're talking about Yemen is that you don't see it delivering anything sensible. The first thing is that between the member countries, you can see a kind of incoherence when it comes to the policies. Obviously, some have decided that especially the mercantile dimension of the relationship with Saudi Arabia was in itself problematic, and with the UAE was in itself problematic, and it was too costly in terms of image. And that was the case at some point for Spain. That was the case also for Germany, when they decided that they would no longer agree to sell weapons to the belligerents. But this did not mean, when it came, for instance, to Germany, that they were actually willing to play an important role. And I think this sort of made many people a bit puzzled, if not sad, because right from the start of the war, many within Yemen and outside of it considered that probably Germany had a specific role which could be very constructive. And yet Angela Merkel and also, I guess, the population itself was not actually willing to see the country intervene and play a significant role. And this was also the case with other countries. I think France had too many interests, and these are mercantile, with Saudi Arabia and then with the UAE, and it did not agree to also take a step. It wanted to be active on the humanitarian side, and a visit in 2018, sorry, by Mohammed bin Salman in Paris generated a kind of reaction by Emmanuel Macron, who said that he would host a humanitarian conference, but it got hijacked by the Saudis in June 2018, and was completely ridiculous in the end, showing that actually France in itself was really unwilling to actually take a step and play I would say a constructive role. And what's interesting probably is to see also how the opinions among diplomats, among French diplomats, have evolved over the last few years, with potentially a new orientation, which is seen by different Yemenis and also different colleagues from the EU as being very openly anti-Houthi. There might be good reasons for it, but that's also what is appearing. I don't see France emerging as a kind of actor able to actually be seen as independent. And this is a role which is being played now by Sweden. It's been the case for a long time. So this does not mean that the member states of the EU are actually completely irrelevant. And the nomination of Hans Grundberg is something which is very important. It's also important because he himself was EU ambassador, and so this gives him leverage, and this gives him also understanding of the different structures within the European Union itself. So this is probably something which is interesting and which might be a novelty, especially since when you look at it, the EU institutions have been rather irrelevant when it comes to Yemen. Statements made by either Mogherini or her replacement, Josep Borrell, have very rarely focused on Yemen. The only thing which emerged has been among the EU Parliament, but it's only wishful thinking in the end. So there's no real intervention.
Nabeel, you address the American view of the work at the UN Security Council, and particularly the work of the representative, maybe especially talking about the role that Martin Griffiths played. And as Laurent was saying, what's the possibility that Gunborg could make a difference? But before you speak, Nabeel, I'd like to make one point about this issue about the role that the UN has played in this, the special representative's position. Oftentimes the success of the singular success during the time that Martin Griffiths was there, the Al Hudaydah agreement, right, or the Stockholm agreement, is seen as a model, kind of a breakthrough. But I think it's well worth pointing out that that success is one of the reasons why you have the problem at Marib today, right? The Houthis certainly realized that they were relieved of the need to try to defend the port, and the argument is that they were able to shift their forces and concentrate directly on Hadi allied forces at Marib. My view is that the special envoy needs to put as much emphasis, recruiting all of the support that was very good back in 2018 to get the agreement in Stockholm. But the same thing needs to be happening right now with Marib. I completely agree with Helen that there needs to be a way to create a combined Yemeni platform, right, to push back against the Houthi. I have my doubts whether they'd be able to do that, but certainly the special envoy could have a role in that. So Nabeel, please take the rest of my time to address the matter.
Let me start by agreeing with you, Steve, that Hudaydah for me was a distraction, as important as it was, for lots of reasons. Possible explosions there, entrance of humanitarian assistance. I think there was too much focus on Hudaydah at the expense of an overall ceasefire, at the expense of looking at the problem as a whole. There was an assumption there that if you start with Hudaydah, there could be an incremental effect. You move to other fronts and you quiet them the way you quieted Hudaydah. That was a mistaken assumption, as other fronts were more important to the fighters, to those on both sides, for different reasons. So I think much time was lost on Hudaydah. I agree on the big picture with Helen that Resolution 2216 is defective for many reasons, but primarily because it's based on an assumption which was not only outdated now, but it was wrong to begin with. The question of legitimacy and the question of treating a group like the Houthis with the strength that they represented and with the potential that they had right from the start, treating them as interlopers, as people you could just order to disarm and move out of Sana'a. It was a terribly mistaken assumption, regardless, again, not a question of right or wrong, not a question of whether the Houthis are good guys or bad guys, but simply realpolitik should have told the framers that that resolution would not work. Now, it also constrains the actions of the special envoy. I agree. If the special envoy has to use that as a guiding framework, I think it's it's a misstep right from the start for the new envoy. I agree also with Elizabeth's chapter in the book, which assesses the transition period as a missed opportunity. Ironically, from the several special envoys from the United Nations, Jamal bin Omar probably had the best vantage point to accomplish something. He had a lot of superpower backing. The Security Council, he had specific backing from the United States. There was a leverage that he could have used, but that he failed to use. And the overall focus on the dialogue, National Dialogue Conference, with all its 550 participants, missed the opportunity of having 4 or 5 or 6 people of the real power brokers do a handshake, have a handshake over what's to be done, what's to be accomplished, what kind of a Yemen could they agree to work towards before you get to the 550 working out a new constitution for Yemen. In the end, after all that hard work, there was still disagreement over the basic division of power in Yemen and over, 5 or 6 or 2 governorates that Yemen could be divided into. So I think there was an underappreciation of the power of the North and the South as 2 big forces that could disrupt any agreement in Sana'a, with the South wanting to secede and the North wanting to assert its power at that point. I think in some fashion, it hadn't quite developed in their minds how, but you needed to deal with that before you go on to the nitty-gritty of constructing a new constitution. There was an opportunity missed there in terms of realpolitik to get those who can affect things on the ground to agree on what it is that they can work towards. And then you set them to work towards that. I think there was also an opportunity for the international community, for the US, for the UN, that missed word development between the carrot and the stick. There was a missed opportunity to think of the carrot approach. What could have been offered to Yemen as a whole at that point? Complete redevelopment of the country, the poorest country in the region. The humanitarian suffering that was beginning to show even at the start, and which has grown to humongous proportions now. I think that was a missed opportunity, and I'm afraid it might still be missed even now, 7 years later. There isn't enough thinking of, putting aside all the who did what to whom. What can we offer all Yemenis? How would the Houthis respond to a very positive, very generous approach, unified and not piecemeal assistance by different countries, unified by the international community to turn Yemen into a heaven, to turn it into a paradise with an example of what positive collaboration between the great powers and the regional powers, what it could accomplish in a country like Yemen.